I remember one time all by myself, 2 o'clock in the morning, no cameras, no nothing, no backup. Guy looked at me and said, "I can kill you if I want to." And we're asking people wearing that uniform to do things that most of society will never see. And then to do it at repetition and expect them to not break a little bit. That's not reasonable.
They're expected to be machines.
Correct. Manhood is about character. It's not about who's got the biggest jacked up truck, the most tattoos, the big muscles. I just got done telling the young men, I said, "You're looking for a girl, and you think she's awesome." I said, "But what have you done to deserve her?"
Welcome back to another episode of the Uncharted Podcast. Today I have a very close friend of mine, my friend Doug, and he's going to be talking about his time in the police force. He's going to be talking about his time as a deputy and what that entails and some insight to his day-to-day life. And thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
And the first question I have is, what are the duties of a police officer?
Well, for a police officer, what you've got to think of is where in the organization are they? Sheriff's offices and city police and state all have a different size. State provides things to other agencies. A sheriff is elected constitutionally.
Okay.
A city chief, the commissioner, or whoever would be a superintendent or a public safety director, they're appointed typically by a city manager, city council, and such. So all those have different sizes with of groupings, but a patrol officer, a sheriff's deputy, a road officer on the state police, they all kind of have the same duties. The state police are going to tend to be on the highways more and deal with crime as they encounter it there. A deputy and a patrol officer on a department are going to be going to, say, domestics. They're going to go to crashes like probably maybe lower speed crashes, the city officer. But so it depends, but that call for service is the term that would be used for a patrol officer. And we've always tried not to lose sight of the patrol officer, the one everybody sees in that squad car running around. Yeah. They're really the backbone of any agency because they're the first one that responds somewhere typically, that is the immediate help. Everybody else comes in and kind of takes the pressure off to take on the lengthy investigation or come and do the crime scene and such. But so a road deputy and a patrol officer can do relatively the same thing. Only we always tease our deputies in Illinois that they were brown, but we'd always tease them about having to chase the cows and the horses. We didn't get near many of them in the city and all that.
I got you. Okay, so how do you get to the state trooper? So the state trooper would be the one, he's a third level?
Well, no, you have those different kinds of agencies. A statewide agency, a county-wide agency, which is the sheriff, and then a city. Some counties can have, like Kentucky, it's a little different. A lot of things are by county. I'm from Illinois, where I might say there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There could be 8 to 10 towns in that county. They all have their own police department. But then there's one sheriff for the whole county. And that sheriff typically could be the law enforcement for a town if they contract with the sheriff. Depends if they're incorporated or not incorporated. Okay. But most of the time they're there helping that one officer in that small town. Because to have your own police department in a city, there's a lot of responsibility because you now have a lot of things you have to tend to. Training is a big expense, not to mention the liability and the squad cars and the other equipment's not near as much of an issue once you have them, but training is a big deal.
So with that training, I've heard that you go to, what's it called? You go into the police academy.
Correct.
Is that where it begins?
That's where it begins, and depending upon the requirements for hiring, you have to be a U.S. citizen, 21, in Illinois I'm talking. It's pretty comparable here in Kentucky, but there are some differences. So I'll speak on Illinois. So that police academy comes once you're hired, once you've gone through the background process, which is very rigorous. As long as they hold that standard, then that's what you get in the end product when somebody actually hits the street, so to speak. But when you get hired, some places would require a degree. Like typically Illinois State Police required a degree. They recently said, we're not going to require a degree. We'll also accept service time at another department as experience and training.
Okay.
But a police department, so they could say you need to have an associate's or a bachelor's. Some would say, like when I started way back in '88, I went in as an 18-year-old and said, what do I need to do? And they said, keep your nose clean, we'll send you to school. So I got hired on when I was 24, and they sent me to University of Illinois for Police Academy. And back then it was like 400 hours, or it's been so many different things now. It's up to maybe 6 something now. I don't know if it's that high or not for sure, but.
Okay, so how difficult, in your opinion, is the academy?
Well, it depends a lot on the type of academy. Again, the one I went to, University of Illinois, it was like college. You were up every morning doing your PT running. And then, the mistake I made was giving my all that first testing for running. So they had 3 groups. They had the rabbits, the middle, and the turtles. I ended up in the rabbits, and now you're sucking wind the whole time, But it's amazing how when you start and when you're done, how it became so much easier. So they do challenge you. But the one I went to is more college, I guess is the short answer. There's different academies around Illinois. They all have to have the same standards and curricula, but they have a different aptitude as far as military. Like the state police, you think you're in boot camp. We got to the place, as far as back when we started, I ended up a lieutenant over operations, or the deputy chief over operations in my department, and was involved in the hiring and the discipline and just different things. But what we talked about was, if we hired somebody that had military, send them to this academy, because we don't need them to become tough again, so to speak.
Yeah.
But sometimes when they haven't had it, to send them one that's a bit more militaristic is good for their discipline. The new people, when you use the word discipline, they think you're talking about getting in trouble. We're talking about self-control. We're talking about doing what you got to do. So there's different flavors of academies.
I've heard there's the academy, and then I've heard some people go to be a correction officer before they go to the academy. Is that a plus, or?
Oh, yes. Sheriff's offices, typically you got to go in through corrections to come out to the road, as they say, but not always. For example, for my town, we had one officer we hired. As soon as he got out and hit the street, still what they call fresh paint or a new boot. People on the street, we hit the call, and they'd normally look at the new guy and say, you're new, huh? Because they see all the shiny gear and everything. Well, he got on the street, and he already knew everybody because he worked the jail for a couple of years. So they were like, hey, how you doing? He already had that rapport with everybody. Also knowing everybody, which is a big deal, because it takes a little while to, I got to the point where I could, run a warrant check or 1029 on so-and-so's birthdays this year. You get to know people's birthdays better than your own family, because you've arrested them so much. But anyway, he would know that stuff like that. So being a corrections officer before is a big step up for somebody when they go on the road.
Is it something that you would advise somebody to do, or just
if you're a sheriff's deputy, they're a different breed to be a corrections officer. I've always said I'd rather put them in and not live with them. I'll say this, though, when I say put them in, I've always tried to separate what they did, because there's a lot of nice people that did something dumb. For different reasons. A young man that stole the flowers for his girlfriend because he was broke and he's only 17 years old. Okay, I get a little more leniency for that than someone who's doing some other things. But so when I say that, just dealing with them long term, and the guys that want to put their foot through the TV, and they no manners, so to speak. But that's how they're brought up. But a city officer, like the agency I was with, the city, we didn't have our own we had a holding cell. But no jail. A sheriff up there did the jail. Down here in Kentucky, it's a completely different elected office, the jailer is, than the sheriff.
Okay.
So they separate down here. Up there, the sheriff is the chief jailer, and the security for the courthouses. We had a couple. The road activity that his deputies did actually was extra, and it's more of an expectation from the community. We maybe talk about community and what they want later, and how different agencies do different things. But in the way back, it was probably in the early 80s, we had a sheriff that they cut his budget. So he said, okay, I don't have to have officers on the road. So he pulled everybody off the road and put them in the courthouse and all that. Took no debt. The community said that's not good. So they demanded the county board give him the money he needed for his budget.
Nice.
And that's the statute in Illinois of what the sheriff's expected to provide, which is not exactly the same here again.
How many years does it take for you to be qualified to become a sheriff or deputy?
Well, a sheriff is an elected position. Illinois, it just recently came about. They passed some laws that you had to be a certified law enforcement officer. Before, like even right now, he's grandfathered in, would be the sheriff in Cook County, Chicago. Mm-hmm. He's an attorney.
Okay.
When you get to an agency that big, you're looking at managing an agency. When you move up in, 25% of a police department or a sheriff's office typically is who gets promoted to supervision, 25%. And as you go up, your duties change. You're not chasing people and writing tickets and investigating crimes. You're doing completely different things. But you still need to understand what it involves, especially like for use of force. Most of the people don't understand how fast it happens. Mm-hmm. And they say, well, I would do this. I'd shoot him in the leg. Well, you weren't there.
Yeah.
And I investigated use of force quite a bit. And it's not how you think it is. But anyway, when you get higher up, as far as your qualifications go now in Illinois, you have to have a law enforcement certification. Before, you could just be somebody that everybody in the county liked and you won the election. And we've had it to where I've got good friends that were, I don't want to get in trouble with them, they're chief jailers, mm-hmm. but they don't have the experience in law enforcement, so it's a little bit of a difficult transition for them. I've seen them make sheriff in the election coming out of the corrections side of the sheriff's office, and it's a little harder pull for them, and things aren't always so easy. I'll just put it that way. I've seen some fail. I don't want to get into stories there. I've seen some huge failures, and I've seen some who made it and accomplished what they should have.
I got you. Okay, so on the detective side, when you're in there, is it 5 years, 10 years before they'll want to do that, or? No,
well, typically an agency is like this. You come in as a patrol level. Mm-hmm. Some agencies are a little different. You might have an officer in charge or a corporal, say, before a sergeant, and they might say that somebody's a lieutenant. In Chicago area, a lieutenant is a shift supervisor. Where I'm from, a sergeant is a shift supervisor, and a lieutenant is what would be the deputy chief. Okay. So their layers are deeper there, but sometimes they just use a name to make it sound a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. So you come in as a patrol officer, and if you have the aptitude and you show ability, within my agency, it was not a promote. Anything that wasn't to sergeant was simply an assignment. So K-9, riding bikes, school resource officer, detective, things like that. Crime scene tech. I was a crime scene tech. Firearms instructor. There's just so many different things you do, but you're still a patrolman or a patrol officer level at that.
I've heard, do you get to choose? Do you get to choose what you to be a K-9, to go into the correction, to be in the inventory? Do you get to choose that, or is it assigned to you?
It's assigned to you. What people would get would be a letter saying, the chief of police saying, you're assigned to this. I've got a few of those letters and can look back on the dates. You're being assigned to this at the will of the chief, because you weren't promoted into that. Mm-hmm. It wasn't through merit and promotion. It was, I see your abilities. I want to develop you. Let me put you in detectives. Let me put you in K-9. Let you be a defensive tactics instructor, a taser instructor, an active shooter instructor. There's all those things that a patrol officer can get involved in, which is very fulfilling and it adds flavor. When they're not out in the squad car answering calls, that's something extra that they can do.
Okay.
But a detective, then you're assigned there, yes, but it's at the will of the chief. If you're put into the drug task force, I always recommended no more than 3 years in the drug task force, even no matter how good they're doing. They might be the best at all of it and making big cases, but you got to consider the person's life. That's a completely different life. I did 12 and a half years in detectives, 2.5 years. They always tease me about being the kitty cop. I was the youth detective. But every child abuse case that came through, guess who owned it? I got it. Started a teen court, started explorers to kind of balance things out for diversions for those arrested as juveniles. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the next 10 years in detectives then, I was there at the will of the chief. And then now that's a completely different aspect on things. I don't know if we want to go that direction yet.
Yeah. Okay, so with you talking about being in a squad car and a bike, how do they assign you that as well? Do you see by your skill set?
Well, when it first started, I had a really good sergeant that was, I won't say push the edges in a bad way. Mm-hmm. He was like, what do we got to do? And so we said, well, we got these recovered bikes. We got these burglaries going on, and we're on 11 to 7 shift, or I was 8 to 4 quite a bit, but 11 to 7. Can we use bikes? He said, okay, 2 of you at a time, go out on the bikes. Well, when we arrested, for a police officer to catch a robbery, even very few of those, but a burglary in progress, it's not common. I've had a couple of them over the years, but most of the time it's after the fact. It's reported. Well, on these bikes, I think we had 3 or 4 times we had crimes in progress, not to mention all the other things that you tripped upon when people don't expect the officers to be on bikes. So that was just our shift doing it, and that made the department take note that we were doing something different because we were given latitude to stay within the boundaries, don't do anything illegal, immoral, or unethical. Mm-hmm. But that was what I liked about my agency. You could be creative, and they would. My first chief would say, "That's a good thought, Doug. Maybe work on developing that." So later on, that was like, it ain't good yet, but think about it. Mm-hmm. But if you got something, they would, and if it was allowed to go forward, they let you do it.
Oh, that's nice.
It's kind of like if you had a big case as a patrol officer. We, instead of taking it away from you and having the detectives do it, we'd say, I got full shift. You wear plain clothes for the next few days and you go work the case with the detectives. So I really enjoyed that. My size agency of 31, we had that ability to do that because you were generalized in all the different things that you did. Bigger agencies, I might be a little off track here, but had a guy come from Washington, D.C. police. Mm-hmm. He rode bike patrol. Well, they just rolled up on a call, answered a call for service, called for a detective, and moved on. He didn't have near the experience in an array of activity like we had in an agency our size. So the bigger the agency could also mean less variety.
I got you.
So where were we going there? I mean, you can get me in different directions. So
you answered the question. Is it harder to get assigned to something you would like in a bigger agency or a smaller agency?
My friends at bigger agencies talk about more politics and maybe some more of a buddy system. But the bigger agencies are really more even locked in when it comes to unions and such, as far as the process of getting into a different position. Our agency, I was happy with it. It was more about merit and your ability, not good old boy. And I think we had a really good professional agency. Okay. As far as how decisions were made. Because they want to do the best for the community. It doesn't do you any good to put somebody, a real good friend in there who can't think his way out of a paper bag. That lets the community down.
Yeah. So it puts that person in harm as well.
Right.
So how do body cameras work?
There's been quite a series. They've got some now that work well. I don't know if we want to mention brand names or not or anything like that, but there's one system out there that all the officers that come together, they all sync together. So now I can watch an event from all these different angles, along with the geo limits. And if the taser comes out of the holster, the camera comes on. If the lights on the car go on, the camera comes on. That's a far cry from what we used to be.
Wow.
I remember one time all by myself, 2:00 in the morning, no cameras, no nothing, no backup. Guy looked at me and said, "I can kill you if I want to." So now at least there'd be a record if he had killed me. But I'd always, we were still in transition a little bit. We had cameras when I retired back in 2014. It was nothing like the system I just told you, because there was difficulties with uploading and them working well and all that. But I'd tell officers, I said, just remember this. One, you're being paid to be an actor. You may not feel like being calm talking to this person that's being irate, but act like you are. And so remember that when there's cameras, you're making a movie. Make the movie. Do things on purpose, like when you're enforcing, say you're on a DUI stop. Do things in front of the camera. We had guys very good at that. When someone says doing their 7 steps, the person, the officer would be there when the person did what would maybe be a point against them or for a mistake. You'd see the officer go like that. That lets a jury see it, lets them note it of what they were thinking, and they're making a record of doing that. Can I go back even before that when,
Of course.
Oh my Lord, VHS. Okay, that's a long time ago. People,
Yes.
okay, we'd always taught officers to realize, I've taught defensive tactics, realize there's people watching you, and you can actually put too much torque or pain on somebody and cause them to resist. So you got to be careful with that. But I remember getting in a knockdown drag out with a guy, 4:00 in the afternoon in the grass. You don't get a fight in the middle of the day, but sometimes you do. I've had a few. And I'm just saying to the man, stop resisting, stop resisting. But I'm having to give him a little pain compliance to get him to stop, and I got him cuffed and all that. But I'm saying that when I got up, I used that as a training point to the officers to say, now if I'd been cussing this guy, if I'd been saying wrong things, the person standing behind us with the camera recording us would have had it all on camera.
Yes.
So remember, you're making a movie. Be what you should be, and have integrity. And when the fight's done, and my shift knew that, no last, and not that they would, no last extra shot. And when the fight's done, the fight's done.
Okay.
But anyway, cameras are great, I think. The problem that you have is people don't know what they're looking at for use of force, because it's two-dimensional to where I might see something out of my eye and all of a sudden you see an action going on. Or you wouldn't see, the camera's quality is better now, but you may not see something. How fair is it at 3:00 in the morning when the guy's bringing something black and dark up like this?
Yeah.
And people want to say on Monday Morning Quarterback show, hey, that's just his cell phone. Well, you want to trust your family to that?
No. And that's one thing. A lot of people say whatever they want to, but the real people will admit, I would have done the same thing.
Right.
Because you are in that position fearing for your life, and you have to protect other people from getting hurt as well.
Right. Right.
How do police officers deal with stress?
The wrong way or the right way? So, stress, lots of officers will tell you, first off, stress, a lot of it comes from inside an agency because they can be critiqued so much and examined so much living underneath a magnifier. But lots of them now, the younger generations are getting it better. But they used to do alcohol, unfortunately, some drugs, some the symptoms rose up, bubbled up from the stresses that they were going through from too many calls of suicides, too many calls of people hurt, too many calls of great violence. And that's why they're doing that. But it could come up even in a domestic violence situation at home, their own home. But the newer guys are doing real good as far as watching their nutrition, trying to get their sleep, exercise, working off that extra that bubbling up that's in there, that aggravation that's there. And I think the newer generations are better at talking. The old generations might be more about just keep it to yourself. The newer ones are better about in having these opportunities to express how they feel about something, because we're human.
Do police officers do therapy?
Yes. The problem with it is this: they can have something offered by their agency, but they don't trust that their agency isn't going to receive that information. And now, like say Illinois, they've changed a few things, and they've actually opened up a facility, because here's what the problem is: if you're in a mental health facility for extended care, it gets reported. Well, then that affects their firearms card in the state of Illinois. And so now can they carry a gun? And now are they a liability? People are going to say, well, you had them on the street and they're having these issues. So it's a whole network of problems to where the reality is we just need to care about the person. Every time there's a traumatic event, we need to do a debrief. We need to give them an opportunity to get in the group, and now they're looking at passing some laws that those are even reportable to follow after for cases. And that's just, to me, that's just crazy. You have to have...
Do the officers ever get desensitized to seeing that kind of stuff? Is that dangerous?
To a point. I saw a lot of stuff, and since I retired, I put it this way, my empathy bone has come back. I've always cared, but I've looked at some stuff that it just wasn't pretty, but I've had a wall. All the autopsies, if I was doing something, I didn't go to autopsies just for going to autopsies. When we had a child death, people wanted to go experience an autopsy. Well, that wasn't the one. Only the necessary there would be there. But you do, but you have to keep a wall. But there have been some occasions that I know I've told you about them over the years about got through my wall, and that's where you've got to have a coping system. With me, it's faith. I think God's real, and we've got to realize that we are creatures, spiritual creatures, and we're asking people wearing that uniform to do things that most of society will never see, and then to do it at repetition, and expect them to not break a little bit. That's not reasonable.
They're expected to be machines.
Correct.
Which they're not.
Yep, correct. They're not machines.
How are police officers held accountable for their actions in battle?
Well, the system that's in place in the laws in Illinois, but also in an agency. Let me give you an example. An officer, back in the day when I was working, we worked 7 days in a row, off a couple of days, worked 7 days more. Okay, so by the time you got to end of 11 to 7, you were pretty wore out. For example, we had an officer, and then when you're off during the day, guess what? You've got court. So you go home and get a couple hours nap, you go to court, and then somewhere in there you got family, and then you got to be back to work. So you can get quite fatigued over time. We had an officer get a little too far over in a squad car. Clicked mirror, busted mirror. He was like, I must have faded over. I didn't realize it. Okay, so the number one thing is what happens to you can be greatly dependent upon whether you're truthful or not about what happened. I mean, if you made a mistake and you got angry and did something you should have, we can deal with that, but you can't lie. Otherwise, you'll end up with a letter by law to the state's attorney. I think, was that a Terry letter or something like that? I don't remember if that's the right term. But anyway, let me go back. So that officer, we can say, okay, we wrote him a ticket for improper lane usage. All right? But he's also could get a letter reprimand, a day off without pay, so many different things within the system of the police department for an administrative investigation. Okay. So if I write him a ticket, say it used to be $120, he's going to cost him $120, and then if he gets a day off, he loses a day of pay. So he gets double hit where a citizen wouldn't. And we need to hold officers at a higher accountability, but fading over in your car on midnight shift because you had court all day and then now you're back, let's give a little bit.
It'd be reasonable.
Yeah. So one of the jobs I had as detective sergeant that went with the position at the time was internal affairs, professional standards, some people call it. And so I investigated the police and the allegations. If it was not something where a patrol sergeant could just take care of his own people to do it, he was rude. And that's the number one complaint. They were rude. Well, it just came from a guy that died, and now you're complaining about somebody who's got something on your grass. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
So anyway, but something a little more severe where they could get time off for it. It typically would come into me to investigate, and I'd have to do the paperwork to let them know their rights, their Garrity rights, and just different terms that are known to them to say what happened. And if they want union representation, they can get that, and they'll usually ask that question. But I found out 98% of the time of when I did those in cases, I was only documenting their defense if somebody sued us. Because that's, we were pretty good at watching for the bad guys. And the 2%, yeah, we went after them people, and the other officers were happy. Yeah. So there is an accountability inside. I'm talking about my agency. Some people may say, well, it doesn't, this and that. But I know as a director for training after I retired, even a lot of agencies sent their supervisors 2 classes on how to properly conduct an internal investigation. And that's a administrative investigation. That's not because say an officer's accused of punching somebody while they're out at night off duty. Well, they got a civil issue there because they're connected to the police department. So I would do an administrative investigation to see if they broke any policies of what's expected of them, because you're 24 hours a day, you're responsible to that agency. Yeah. Well, say the state police got called in because it's an officer and everybody says, we don't want to do that. So we call the state police in, and they would do the criminal investigation. When I had guys in with me, I'd give them the paperwork and said, don't kill the messenger. But I also said, don't lie to me. So I'm going to take it and throw it on the wall. And what sticks like spaghetti, it is what it is. I'm not going to massage it. I'm not going to make it look like a smiley face and all that. And then when we find out if it's something you did that you shouldn't do, because the 3 things that most agencies deal with in misconduct for officers is anger, greed, and girls. Those are the 3 things that are the problem. Okay. And that's why it's so important for a supervisor to be active in what's going on. But to get ahead of it, when we're still talking about internal controls here. Mm-hmm. I had an officer one time going through a divorce. The job is very hard on marriages. And he was going through a divorce, and at briefing, I'm sitting there with my shift, and the offgoing is giving us what happened last 24 hours, and he's not acting right, and I already know he's going through something. Well, then we go out and get what we call 10-8 in service, and he gets this call to this place that we go to 1,000 times a month, it seems like. And they're difficult people. So he goes over there, so I just mosey over, and I'm there, and I arrived just before he let loose. I just walked up, and the people were being their normal difficult, and I could see it just ready to come out, and I just said, hey, why don't I handle this one, and you go ahead and head on down the road. So I kept him out of trouble, because it would have been, that's another thing an agency should do, is keep an eye on things, but not cover them up. And later he said, thanks. But agencies that don't do something like, I know you have a drinking problem, I know you this or that, instead of having that hard conversation and forcing that officer to deal with something, they wait. This happened at a neighboring agency. They waited all this time. This guy would show up sometimes with alcohol in his breath. And that's no good. Well, then one time he's going down the road and he hit another car and then ends up calling it in as a stolen car and a hit and run and lost his job. Well, to me, that's the agency's fault. They should have dealt with him 10 years before when they knew he had a drinking problem. Yeah. Because I think the highest responsibility for an agency is to take care of the people.
Because the people are the ones out there taking care of your reputation.
The more you help them and keep them, you hired them because of their character and abilities and where they were. And if you don't help them maintain that, was it Nietzsche? He had a saying, he said, when you look into the abyss looks into you. be careful when you work with monsters that you don't become one. So if you don't have a constant readjustment of where you're going, it's easy to end off track. I think that's an agency's responsibility to find out where somebody's head is, and it's family.
Yeah.
You know.
Man. With what you talked about, it's a struggle for marriages. Is that something you see a recurring effect in?
Yeah. Well, a female officer, the divorce rate's 90%.
Wow.
If they even got married, because men can have a difficulty with the fact that she carries a gun, she tackles people, she chases off. Could I do that? You know, and that's beyond the normal man having trouble if his wife makes more money than him. Mm-hmm. But regular marriages, I think old days and the newer days, it's still all those same issues that are there. And that's another one of those, how they compensate with stress, is they start chasing after each other, along besides drinking and some drugs. But just going to court, if they don't manage it, if they don't manage what's going on, and the problem is your agency, if they call me for work, I don't have a choice. I've got to go to work.
Yeah.
You know, my wife asked me that one time. That's when I was maybe a couple years on, and she said, "Why don't you just tell them no?" I said, "Well, dear, here's the totem pole. I'm here. Okay, I can tell them no, and they're going to say, thanks for trying, but be here by 11.
Yeah.
You know, so I just say yes, and that's a lot of the stress. I have a great wife, and it takes I'd go to work and maybe not be home on time, and she wouldn't 3:11. She would never go to sleep. But then in my later years, say detectives, or a call out. Say I get a call out at 1 o'clock in the morning. I may not now be home for 2 days. She doesn't call. She knows if something happens, they'll call her. And one time she had to come to the hospital for me. I got hit by a drunk driver. Mm. But other than that, the other couple times I went to the hospital, I didn't tell her, so I got in trouble when I got home. But so anyway, it's some of it also is I've got these things going on, my experiences. And I'm still talking about the divorce.
Yes.
They don't communicate with their spouse. They start communicating with somebody else that has the same job, because they say, well, they can relate. Because it is hard for a wife or a husband or a significant other maybe to understand some things. Because when you have two people, if I say, go to the mall and find somebody else with a red hat, you go, because you got a red hat. Oh, there's a red hat. Hey. Or if you're going through, say you're in New York and you hear somebody talking about Kentucky or Florida or where you're from or something like that, and you go, hey, where are you from? And all of a sudden you're best friends because you're from the same place. Mm-hmm. That same affinity happens in the job, and if an officer's not careful, he'll lose the connection with his family, and the new family becomes the job. I think officers, when they get on, they need to say, I want to have the same friends I have when I retire as when I started. And I can say that I have the same friends from when I started. You know, I got in supervision issues. I became a supervisor 8 years on. So I've always had a wall. I'll come help take your siding off your house and put it on. I'll come help you do your roof. But I don't party with you. I don't go hang out with you, because I might have to tell you something you don't like at some point. But those officers there, they lose that connection because they say, well, my other significant other doesn't understand. And they start talking to somebody else, and now trouble starts there. Or just not talking, there's a distance.
No communication.
Yeah, just a distance. There's some training. When I took it home, it's a video. I had all the officers watch it when they started. Right now, I haven't thought of it for a long time, but right now my mind's going, what is that? What is it? But anyway, it was talking about just the psychology of a person, and when they get involved in law enforcement, and one of the things, what happens to you, it's like, why are you kicking the cat? Well, because the boss made me mad at work. So now it comes all the way to the house. So an officer can do that too, is take the stresses from work and come home, and instead of realizing it's connected. My wife will look at me and say, are you grouchy today? And I'll honestly say, well, I guess maybe I am. Why am I grouchy? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to bleed out on you. Yeah. But that doesn't happen always. And that's just our experience. And because of this training I'm talking about, when I had my wife and my daughters watched this presentation, as I had gone to it live in Illinois at the drug enforcement officers. We were doing a lot of drug enforcement, undercover buys and all that. Me and my partner were there, and he got done, and Gil Martin's the man's last name, Dr. Gil Martin out of Phoenix, Arizona.
Okay.
And very good training. I recommend it highly for officers to understand what their family would go through. But my partner, he says, why didn't somebody tell this to me 20 years ago? And I said, 3 marriages ago? Because he's been, because that's the effect this has on you. And when I showed my family this, they said, Dad, that's you. And I thought I had been doing a good job, not letting it through, but just some of the tenseness or the distance that you get. Oh, you guys go on, I'm going to just stay here. You're dealing with the stresses. So that all those things are so important that people don't realize, and that if they're not armed with that information, when they become a law enforcement officer, then we're setting them up for failure. Because I'd have somebody watch it at a year on, but when you see something, it's a whole lot different when you have the experience.
Yes.
So a year later, then we'd have them watch it again. I actually put it on the calendar. A year later, you need to watch this with your family. And now in one of the academies, I had the guys talking to them, and they said, "Yeah, we watched that the last day." But there's no such more impact than a year later when you have the experience.
Yes.
When the report came out of the guy who shot a man because that man took away his partner's taser, I thought, in use of force mind, thinking through, I could see where that'd be justified. Well, when I had my 5-second ride with the taser, I didn't just say in my head, that could be. I'd say, you take my taser, I'm going to shoot you. Because I've done the ride, I know what it feels like. I know how. So now that experience gave me much more volition, or much more vehemence. I guess maybe that's the word. Mm-hmm. And an officer, I keep wanting to say cop, and maybe that's most people. People may not like that. We just say cops. But once they've got some experience under their belt, that'll hit home even more.
One thing I wanted to go back to, we were talking about the divorce rate. Is it different with officers that are men and women in the force? Is that percentage rate different?
That's why I say a female officer is about 90%, and a male officer could still, maybe is it 60? I don't remember what the stats are here now.
Yeah.
It might even be higher than 60. But it's a little higher. What's the society, 55 or something like that? That's pretty high. I think it was a little higher than society even.
Wow.
But I haven't looked at it lately, so I don't know.
What were some ways that your wife could help you through that situation, like while you were an officer, while you were a police officer?
Well, at times, again, you don't realize that something's bleeding through. It's so important for people just in general not to actually react all the time. People can do that in relationships, and it just makes things rise up higher. I guess what I'm saying is sometimes I might have said something not realizing the spirit or the attitude I had with it and all that. I really didn't mean anything. I didn't recognize I was doing it, but I could see in my wife's eyes, she'd go. And I thought, oops, what happened there? So she didn't jump back on me. I just saw the look, and then right there, because I value the relationship, I said, I need to fix something. The other thing is, like I said, if the phone rang at 1 o'clock in the morning and they needed a detective, they had to call me, so I got called a lot. I'd be asking questions, and if you asked her now, what's the most common thing she heard me say at 1 o'clock in the morning during that time frame, what it would be, the question, without thinking, she'd say, is he dead? Because I had to know that question, because if he's going to or he is, I had to go, because I was always the number 2 guy for the detective or bringing everybody in. So she was very understanding. She knew that the job required a lot. She was awesome with our girls. I always think, did I do okay with the girls? And people say something about our girls, how well they're behaved. And I said, well, that's my wife's fault. But she's just so understanding. And for 20 years, she never actually told me, I worry about you all the time. For 3-11, she didn't go to bed till I got home.
Wow.
That was a busy shift. And 11 to 7, she never slept well. She just worried. Yeah. But I guess how she helped me is I say this, and she didn't nag after me. She didn't be harsh with me. She'd bring things up so we could discuss them. We had bylaws in our marriage anyway of how we talk to one another. So I was married in 1985, so I had 3 years of marriage before. So it might be a little different, somebody who just marries straight into it. So we had worked some things out before I even got on the job, so to speak.
Planning ahead. I got you. I had a question. With that, how would you advise somebody of faith of what they can expect going into going to be an officer?
Well, you're going to see, it's really no different than going in the military, other than you can stay close to your family. Because you're going to see things raw, you're going to see things gross, you're going to see other people, even in the job, because EMS, fire, and police, they all end up with a macabre sense of humor. I've kidded before, I said, never take me serious unless there's a body on the floor. And then, I'm not sure. But you've got to realize that that's an element of life, but somebody needs to do it, and I think a person of faith is the perfect person to do it. I do believe it needs to be a calling, not just a preference for a career. Because if you go in just a preference for a career, there's so many other things pulling on you that it can get you really out of left field. For example, I had a background done on a guy, and I said, don't hire him. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's an awesome guy, got his own construction company. Don't hire him. Well, they hired him anyway. Well, then he got on and he ended up with all the stresses, back to drinking. His life just went back down the tubes again. So anyway, so we're talking about that. I think it needs to be a calling first off, and that's where I start talking about. There's things out there talking about finding your why.
Yes.
What's your motivation? Mm-hmm. What drives you? Me, I know what it is. It's caring for people. From my growing up, that like the Owensboro youth talk I did, I gave them my why as an example of why, because my why is I'm doing it whether I was in law enforcement, because what I did for 32 years is just what I did. You can put titles to it, but why I did it is about people. I didn't go into it for power, and we try to get those guys out with the psych tests and all that, the sociopaths that want to just be able to tell people what to do. Yeah. I was more of a rescue, help you. I don't want to, I went through these things, not everything that I help people with, but I went through a lot to know I want you to feel like you're included, that you're not alone. I want you to feel better. And I think that makes a good police officer for the reason that you go in. In London, Sir Robert Peel, he founded the Metropolitan Police Department, and he's famous for some things. One of them is the people are the police, and the police are the people. It's just that the police are those given to the full-time endeavor to take care of the community. Because you have in the books in Illinois, it's not police officer, it's peace officer. Peace officer. To keep the peace, which is a whole lot more than putting the habeas corpus on somebody. Yeah. It's about what do I need to do in a community to help everyone feel safe, because that's a lot of it. Am I going to chase the gangs? Yeah, I am, but I'm also going to try to enable that community of how to communicate with one another. How to teach a landlord how to not rent to the drug dealer, not rent to the land, so the whole town is okay. Those kinds of things, the caring part of things.
Yeah, gotcha. I like that. I like that a lot. How do you were in a position where you were building people? How did that transfer over to building young men up and teaching them how to be a man?
Well, as a young man, I started church. I've been in church, but this way that I'm in now, the pastor I had, he was really, you think you want to, say you feel like you want to be a minister. Well, serve people, okay? A police officer is a minister of a sort. He's serving. Yeah. That's the attitude he ought to have, is I'm serving the people. And So it wasn't a hard transition to what I'm doing now, talking with young people and young men, especially when I talk to them about making men, that I've been doing all through my career and in that church setting in my late teens. It was about bring somebody along, teach somebody. I told people when I was a sergeant, I made it here somehow, 8 years, and I'll be happy to share that information with you because my job as a sergeant is to make more sergeants, to make my replacement, to develop you, to delegate to you. And as a lieutenant, I actually had one sergeant. She told me she didn't know hadn't announced I was leaving, and she said, "Why are you being so hard on me?" I said, "Well, I can put the information out there to make new lieutenants, but it's up to people to grab it and grow with it and use it. Men will tend to the area about them, and if there's a need, they'll do the best they can to help that need." So to say me to have something was put on my plate, and I say, well, and here's the question I ask. I don't say, how can I do this? I'm swamped. It would be, who can do this? I've been saying that all day. Yeah. Who can do this? So therefore I say, well, okay, you have these attributes. You have this talent I see that's possible in you. Let me delegate this to you and use it to grow you into being more functional or more fluid in doing what needs to be done. Yeah. But anyway, the whole point is to develop people, and so must be a delegation. And as I look around now, the last couple of years, I really started talking to some young men back November, December, pushing on them. But it's been a topic of mine for a while. Is we have a shortage of men. Society. I don't know if you want to go this direction or not.
Let's go.
That we have a society that believes that a minority that says toxic masculinity. Well, that's because the masculinity maybe that they've looked at is not what it should be. The men that should be involved are this, and that's why I'm still married, because my wife's so understanding. But anyway, my point is this. Let me get back on track. Manhood is about character. It's not about who's got the biggest jacked up truck, the most tattoos, the big muscles. I just got done telling the young men, I said, you're looking for a girl, and you think she's awesome. I said, but what have you done to deserve her? Have you got your affairs in order? Do you understand your spiritual nature? Do you understand your economics? Do you have academically? Because a girl wants three things. She wants somebody to provide for her, and it's hard written in there. It's not that she can't work. My wife worked till we had kids. All that. It doesn't make them less. It's just men are hardwired for the women to respect them, but women are hardwired for somebody to provide, protect, and give them affection. And the girls who don't get it, they're that girl driving that car when I stopped it, that 17-year-old pretty girl with this gangbanger that's been arrested 10 times dealing dope. You want to say, why are they in the car together? Well, she's looking for something that he's given her. He's toyed with her emotions. Yeah. So men are not, the biggest thing is, like I told them the other day, from what I understand, on a SEAL team, and I know from my agency, we didn't do things to make the arrest, so to speak, when things got real bad. I did it for the love of my brother. I did it because this guy's got 3 kids and a wife, and I don't want him not to go home. Yeah. So you do things that may be a little dangerous to protect one another. So men, the biggest thing, and I mentioned the SEAL team, I think, one, we know it's okay to cry, but 2, if you ask them what a real man is, it's not the man with the big muscles, it's the guy who loves someone more. What's love? If you give your life for a friend, if necessary. So men, right now we have a shortage because society's produced, I'll say boys, that just look at themselves. Okay, there's 3 categories. There's a boy who's still just living off of mom and dad independence mode. There's the guy, that's that one that was in that car with that pretty girl. And then there's the man. And so the litmus test between the boy and the man is a boy comes out of his room. You might have heard this already. The boy comes out of his room, sees the mess in the living room on his way to get to the drink in the kitchen. He gets to the kitchen, gets a drink, walks back out, and in both directions he went, oh, look at that mess. He did nothing about it. He's still boy. But The boy that walks out sees the mess. He might have walked by one time, comes back, feels a little bit, maybe I'll make mom happy, maybe I'll make dad happy, or maybe I just care about things being picked up in my environment to straighten it up in order, so I pick it up. Well, that boy is on his way to becoming a man. He's not there yet, but he's showing signs of growth.
It's in the process.
He's in the process. So manhood's character, and if we can promote character, and there's many different things, and we can push on into leadership as far as the delegation goes, and finding out what somebody's why is, and that's what's going to fulfill them. But serving someone else is the only place you'll get fulfillment. So,
outside of the ministry, or I'll say the parents, who should have that responsibility? Who should take that upon themselves? To help if they see a young man struggling? Who should take that responsibility on themselves?
Well, I don't think you should. It depends on the age of that young man. Mm-hmm. Like right now, I'm in the group I've got. We're 16 to 26, and there's a few girls in the group too, 14 and in the early 20s. So I had to change it from making men to life development class. I thought making men was a much better. I really like. He's an Army Ranger, Chuck Holton. He's got a book on manhood. He's got another, Making Men. He's got another one called Prowess. That's a little harder to define. But anyway, my point is, first, I think you're asking who would be proper to do that. I think anyone that is going to start trying to mentor a young man should have that person's, if they're 17, 16, younger than that, they'd need to have permission from some authority in that person's life, because there need to be some guarantee about motive and such. You can't just let anybody. I know somebody that was just freely giving information to some young men, just messed them up, especially on the girl topic, just messed them up. So I don't think, I don't take it, I don't just give it. I got to make sure it's okay to do.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just words of encouragement. Be the man you should be, that kind of thing.
How should a young man interact with a lady that he likes?
First off, just in the talk and just in the conversation, he ought not do anything to manipulate her with those three things I mentioned. Okay? Mm-hmm. I really think, the talking is good, and then on the phone is real good, because obviously you need to get to know the other person before it gets to be just a physical attraction. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with saying, "Oh, she's pretty." There's nothing wrong with that at all. But how to interact would be, you can really throw off a young lady with the wrong messages. I know of some young man, he's just friendly to everybody. There's one girl, he didn't necessarily, when I say like her in that way, he was just being friendly and all that. Well, she took it completely different, because she's got a hunger, and there's something that wasn't being met. And a handsome guy or a good-looking guy talking to her. So a guy's got to be real careful about the messages that he sends out. Okay. Especially if he starts playing with some of those things, those three areas.
So right now we have, as you said, a problem with, we have a lot of boys right now. And a lot of boys think that it's their way or the highway. How would you try to get through to them?
With their way or the highway with the girls?
Yes.
Okay. That's a messy situation, bad setup for a marriage. First thing that we should understand is leadership is not about power. Leadership is about responsibility. Who am I responsible to take care of? There's some philosophies that the military has, and it's mentioned in other places. I think Simon Sinek, he does a lot of conversations on some of these things. He's got the book "Leaders Eat Last."
Yes, I read that.
Okay, and I got taught that long before that book was out. I got taught that as a young man, mm-hmm. And so I know, and they're principles, and those principles are always true. no matter how they might be presented. That's what you got to drill down is it a truth? But anyway, they need to understand that, can I go Bible on you in Genesis?
Of course.
Adam was created by God first. Eve wasn't even there when God said, dress and keep the garden.
Yes.
Okay? So there is a difference between headship and leadership. Headship is who holds the buck, who's the most responsible when things go wrong. I'd always tell the guys, I said, if I need to know something that the chief's not going to like, please let me know. And they might walk in, like a patrol sergeant. Your officer will walk in, hey boss, you may want to know that you're going to get a phone call from so-and-so at this last call I was on. They weren't real happy. All right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so tell me what happened. So because I'm the one that's going to get in the most trouble for what you did.
Yeah.
And it's not about being a dominant force. It's about, like I kidded over here, I said, if you get to where there's one bite left of the cookie and your wife wants it, guess what you do? You eat it real quick. No, I said, you share it because you're supposed to, you're supposed to adore that woman. You show mutual respect. You water her with what she needs, and she's going to bloom into a beautiful rose. And what's that going to do but nothing but benefit you?
Yes.
So to have an attitude of domination, you're my slave. No, this is your life partner. She is your helpmeet. Later in Genesis 2, she's your helpmeet. Mm-hmm. She's not slave, which just means if you're paying attention, when I say you meet somebody and you walk away and your wife goes, something about that, you better pay attention because there's a sense there. But my wife understands also that if we discuss things and I'm the one that's the most responsible, that God's going to hold responsible, and yes. It's not a negative to be emotional. Women can be more emotional in touch, more emotional EQ. They could be smarter than the guy too. I mean, but that's not really my point. It's listen to your wife, but in the end, you have to be going by principle. What's the best thing to do? And at some point, if you have been trustworthy in the relationship, you earn equity, you earn trust. But if you haven't been trustworthy, you could be appointed a sergeant. That doesn't make people want to follow you.
Yes.
That's different. You can become a husband, but now you've only just begun the road to building up rapport, building up trust with your significant other, So you've got to, and that's done through leadership is responsibility, not power. Headship without charity or love is you're a dictator. Just a dictator or a tyrant. And that doesn't make for a happy environment. But to do things to realize that that woman was given to you as a helpmeet, but you'll die for her. Yeah. That's the example that we've got in the Bible, in Christ, in the church, is Christ died for that church.
Yes.
The man should die for that woman, and the only time he pulls the power card is to say, this is serious enough that we've got to. Like, I don't want animals. I grew up with animals. I've had dogs since the kids moved out. I've got a cat. Do I want a cat? I don't want a cat. My wife's gone right now. I don't want a cat. That cat is driving me nuts. But I'm not Lord of the house. I'm not if my wife is her own unit. My wife needs to have, every woman needs to have, if she's not working, men ought not hold all the money. Men ought to say, what do you want for your spending money? They ought to have that out of respect, because you don't have a slave. You have a person that's equal to you, except for the fact that you're held more responsible by God, and in the hardwiring in us, it works. So we have a cat.
How do you? Well, I'll use me as an example. I was taught that stuff when I was young. Mm-hmm. From a young age, people that were very respected, and they talked to my parents. I was able to go and shadow every Saturday throughout the week. I was at somebody's house. They were training me how to do this, training me how to do that, training me how to be a man. You hold yourself a certain way. Mm-hmm. How do you translate that? Because it's difficult when people don't have that upbringing? How do you
Correct.
translate that?
Yes. I think it's more easily grasped if we can have something tangible to say, like, work on this month's character trait of diligence. What is diligence? Measure yourself, because character is simply a word, it's like diligence, but there's good and there's bad, or a lack of, or a lot of. So to say work on diligence or responsibility or faithfulness, there's a whole, the courage, there's a whole, the list I have is 49 of them. Okay? So if a man wants to develop himself, he looks at spiritual, academic, social, and financial. There's one more, which I'm not remembering. So if a man wants to measure that, but to say what you were taught through experience, a man can start down that road, or a young man can start down that road by pick a character trait and work on emulating it and put in your life, because it will then give you the ability to put in place, well, how am I humble? How does humility work? You're going to study that, and you're going to find out that if I want to do that, I have to change and add it to who I am. And when you do that, now you're learning those same things that you were taught, not necessarily skill on how to cut a board or do something else, but the inside stuff of what a person is. I think that's an more easily measured way of building yourself. Academically, read books, and you can say, how do you do this? Well, YouTube it nowadays.
Exactly.
But looking at character, that's the big thing. I think if we focus on character when we're trying to talk to making men or women, that's the way we're going to get there. If they haven't had it, not everybody's blessed to have had. My parents were married until my dad died.
Yes.
But still, there was a deficit. I've always said, you love your family, you love your parents, but still look at what was done and say, is it healthy for me to emulate that?
Yes.
There's a yes and no. There's a yes and a no. We can still love our dad.
Of course.
Just like I would ask you before you guys get married, give me one flaw for your wife. Don't answer right now, okay?
Of course.
Okay. And right now, I kiddingly say there isn't any. She's perfect. Okay. It's somebody else's job to try to fix that. It's not my job to fix that. But if I can't honestly give you a response in a marriage counseling situation about that one thing, then I'm not ready to get married. So, but I can still love that person. Yeah. Just like my father, if I see a deficit, I still love him, but I just don't want to do that part of it.
I remember I forget how many years ago it was, we were standing in the campground and we were talking, and I was standing off talking to somebody, and I remember you walked through and there was a group of young girls on this side and there was a group of guys on this side, and they were all talking in their groups. Nobody was talking to each other. And I remember, I believe it was you that went through and said to each group, you can talk to them. You said it very loudly so each one would listen.
Yeah.
How do you get both groups to communicate with each other? Because right now there's a problem that neither one wants to communicate.
Right,
to each other.
and that's what I've been dealing with in the last few months. Is for some reason there's this nervousness. Again, character. The focus in the 1800s was all about character. The focus now, since the 40s, 50s, around in there, is all about lying and faking it and making people think you're something that you're not. So just be real. Hey, who likes that new voting game? Who likes this? Who wants to play this? Who wants to do that? Just be real. But like I warned the other Saturday to the young men, I said, be careful though in that group that you don't go full out all boy. I said, because you may not like somebody at that point, but they're watching you.
Yes.
And if you're all boy, they're going to remember that. And someday when you're going to say, hey, I like her, she's going to say, you're in the friend zone. I remember you. So you got to have a certain way. There's a way that guys can be when no one else is around, and you still need to have a control. But when the girls are around, you got to remember you're being watched, and you don't want to wipe out all your possibilities.
Constantly being watched.
But and I've always told them that with young ones that want to say, I want to date somebody. I said, well, you want to date somebody? You ready to get married? I always say, what's the purpose of dating? It's when you find one person and you're ready, and you got things in order enough that if you say in a year we're going to get married, well, are you still got to? I don't think anybody's. I might offend a few parents. I don't think you have to be done with college and all that. Sometimes we have too much that we put on people.
Can you repeat that again?
Maybe not. Maybe we want to cut that part out.
No. That needs to stay.
But my point is we get that from we see the example of this culture that does that, and we look at what it produces.
Yes.
You get two people alone in there, and bad things can happen. They don't mean to, but emotions get involved in it. So I say just be in a group, and be in a group, there's no pressure, and you'll be able to identify the characteristics of a person that you like, and you'll be able to say, oh, she is sweet. Look at how she's interacting with this person. I remember my wife, I just fell head over heels for her, but she was my best friend's girl.
Oh, yes.
But I was there, and I remember the time she was doing the spaghetti thing, and it come up and went all over her face. And I said, "Isn't it embarrassing when it does that?" And she goes, "Not when you're with friends." She covered, real well. Yeah. But so you get to know somebody how they are, because if you do end up marrying them, you're going to be socially going out together. And if that person's so introverted it drives you crazy, you got to get past the crush. I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I always tell, because I can't speak for anybody else but us. So I would tell them, because I've heard there's two things that would always drive me up the wall. Is we were 12 hours apart. The one where everybody that I knew, I won't say everybody, majority, that was 2 hours, 6 hours, nobody wanted to put in effort to go see each other. Mm-hmm. When I wish that 12 hours was 2 or 6.
Right.
And then the second one was, in my mind, that I want to talk to as much as I could, because if you're going to live with that person, there's no getting away from them. They're going to be there 24/7. Mm-hmm. And then I would hear people say, "Oh yeah, we didn't talk. We didn't talk today. We talked 2 or 3 times a week." I'm like, I said, "You're not going to listen to me. I'm going to do this because this is my responsibility." But I said, I would probably talk to him a little bit more, because you'll wake up one day and like...
And you also have to ask yourself how far down the road was your relationship with one another. Because getting to know one another, again, being friends and cordial, and then slowly getting to know one another, it depends what track you're on too. Exactly. If you're saying, okay, I know this is the one, well, now you want to accelerate. You made me think of back in the day, you had to pay the long distance phone bill. I had a girl I was seeing in Chicago. My sister was in Chicago. There's a church up there. I was talking to her. I remember one month I was making not much, maybe back then $2-3 an hour on a horse farm. One month I had to pay a $150 phone bill, and it's not the girl I married, because it's long distance. But that's my point: is you got to get to know somebody, and if you keep it level, then you can still look them in the eye later.
Yes.
Because I had to say, this isn't going to work.
And,
you got to say, this isn't going to work. The wonderful person, it's just something, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when it's the one, well, I was lucky that we lived in the same 2 towns right there.
Oh, so with that part, there's 2 things that come to mind, and I'll ask one at a time. I hear some people say, "Well, God told me this. God told me that they were the one for me. God sent them to me, or I'm waiting for God to tell me." What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here we look in the Bible and it says God spoke to Abraham. It never tells us in how. Okay, we know, like Paul on the road to Damascus, he heard a voice. Yeah. Everybody else heard this thunder. I believe God does and can speak to people, but sometimes it can be also their emotion and their desires. I think if God did talk to them, what you really do then is look for the verification and the validation through the circumstances. Because if God did say, do this, he will then provide things to do that. But I don't in any way mean, I feel that God has spoke to me over some things over the years. I've got to use that. First I thought, well, that still small voice, and often whatever Christian direction you go, I won't say religion, Christian belief system there is, they all understand that they believe God can speak to a man, but it doesn't mean it's an audible voice. It just, that's still small voice.
Yes.
And then when you realize, you're like, well, why did I think that? Maybe that, and so you believe that, because we believe God's involved in our lives.
Yes, definitely.
But you then need to say, does the Word of God line up to it? Are the principles the same? Because God's not going to violate His Word. And then say, okay, if that's it, what is God going to supply? And I've had those circumstances where I know God. I think it's a bad thing to say if we're talking about some Bible verse to be interpreted, and you say, well, God told me this. Well, that just shuts down the conversation.
Yes.
But you can say, I feel impressed this, or you can actually, I've had and been praying for a friend with his daughter had cancer, and I know God said, don't pray for her anymore. She's fine, and she's fine. But so anyway, when he does that, though, he tends to give other validations as well.
Like signs and wonders of...
Well, things line up. Like I'm in Kentucky because I believe it was God. And praying about things, I feel that what I feel God was talking to me about, and I'm praying about things, well, what about this, this, and this? There's 3 different things. Mm-hmm. And guess what? They all just boom, 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 fell in place. I'm nobody. I've been able to be in really good places between universities and FBI and all that. And I don't think you have to be some people say to be a Christian, you got to be somebody in that brain.
Yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that. I believe you can, the Word of God says rightly divide the Word of God. You can articulate, you can look at the Bible, and first off, you recognize all the principles that are in there when you're talking about leadership. That's where it all comes from. That's why it all works. But other things, some people make up some pretty weird things for their doctrine or for their things, and you just kind of let that go. But you just understand that God talks. We've got friends. We got over here at Owensboro. There's one. What was he talking about? He's from Illinois. He's just ready to get his doctorate.
Davis.
Yeah, Davis. I didn't know if I want to mention names and stuff, but he got his associates in this, and bachelor's in this, and he's getting his doctorate and about human anatomy and all that. He's no dummy.
No.
He's no dummy.
Not the slightest.
And I like to think that I'm not a dummy, because if I had found something better, I would go for it. But in my academic life or my professional life, I've only been successful as I am because of what God's done for me and the support of my wife, which is hard when you ask me how. It's hard to articulate someone who's just been there the whole time and supportive.
Gotcha.
So,
is there any advice that you would give the young people to not waste their youth in?
Yes. Just like as people say, I can't wait till I retire. Mm-hmm. Okay? Life is phases. Once you got married, you're in another phase than when you were single. And I tell the young men and the young people, I said, don't waste your singleness. You want that pretty girl? Prepare yourself now. You don't have to have perfected it and have it done, but boy, are you on the track of going in the direction you should.
Yes.
Because if you're still playing video games till 3 and sitting home at mom and dad's house, you're not ready. So don't waste your singleness. Get busy. It's like the book. Women can use this too. Although it's out of the book by Chuck Holton on Making Men. Mm-hmm. It's an acronym, SHAPE. First is S, submit yourself to God. That's completely your intellect, your emotions, your desires, all of that. And then the next is honor. Honor what God honors, and don't worry about, don't the other stuff. Yeah. A is assess. And that's why I'm going there, is because a young person, if they're not assessing their lives now, is if what you don't measure, you can't improve on. You're just floating along. So assess. And then P, I sometimes say purge, but it's perish to your desires. Because I want to finish my black belt, but in my other goals, that conflicts. So I had to give that up a long time ago. So I had to perish that desire. But also then purge. If I got a bad thing that I do that costs me a lot of money when I get to my academic or my financial part and spend too much money on that, I better purge that habit. So, but then the E is engage. You can have all these plans in the world, but if you don't put them into action, if you're 16 and there's a balance here, so I'm not getting in front of the parents. If you're spiritually strong enough, that's what you got to prove to your parents. Well, you get doing some work. Otherwise, being self-employed, mowing the yard or just cleaning things. If you're learning for how to fix it things, become a fix-it man for the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. But that acronym SHAPE is what I believe anybody single should be considering, because you need to get out of in the 3 phases of growth: dependency, somebody who's changing your diapers and supplying all your needs. Yep. And many of the young men I'm dealing with now are in that independent section next, where they're still living at mom and dad's house, so they balance between being independent, get their job, paying for their own stuff, but honoring their parents. It's the first commandment with a promise. And then they think I'm all independent and I'm all grown up. Well, that's not it. The next step up is just like when I say, why did I help my friend at work? Because I love him. Well, the true fulfillment, the true top of it is interdependency. Paul talks about it in the New Testament, about the body of Christ. I have skills that you don't have, but you have skills that I don't have, so we need each other. Yes. And we become interdependent on one another. Just like we're talking about men and women, we're just designed differently. Yes. I'm not better than my wife. I just have a different responsibility. I open the door for my wife not because she's weak, but because I think she's valuable. And I want to honor her, to show her that. So to realize that independent is not the top of it. We have to become interdependent, which is a little bit against what people think. But use the SHAPE acronym if you're a single person and start talking to your parents. If you want an honest answer, you tell your parents, I'm thinking of doing this. And a young man was listening on this here recently, and he went out, he was doing a 20-hour job, and he started rattling the cage for another job, and he talked about moving that, and his mom was saying some things, and I told him, I said, here's her concerns. She knows you. She's got this that she's concerned. You need to answer those concerns, and she'll probably be at ease and cooperate, and I won't say cooperate in that manner, but understand. So when he talked to her, he told her about it, and he answered. He said, "I know you think this. Finished my bachelor's for business," and that's an adult conversation. Yes. And she went, "Okay." So he's coming along doing that, and young people need to do that because they need to hear someone and listen. I was taught when you're being corrected, don't say a word. I've had it happen. I got chewed out by a sergeant one time. I was sick. I was going to the doctor, and I used to drive out of habit. My wife's with me, but I'm going to the doctor. I'm sick. I called off 311. I go right past this road, and I knew exactly what the sergeant was going to think. So my body language, I went, oh, and he probably saw that too. Well, he comes pulling up the intersection in a squad car, and here I am, and I'm on the way to the clinic. The next day I'm coming in. He pulls me into his office with my sergeant on the oncoming shift, and he chews me up, chews me down. We rely on people to be here when they're supposed to be here. Well, I got taught, keep yourself. I didn't defend. I didn't say a word. That guy left. My sergeant looked at me and said, "What happened?" Because he never asked me the other half of the story. That drives me nuts when leaders don't do that. Did I say that yet? It drives me nuts when people don't do that. At least find out because you got one person's perception. But anyway, I'll come back off that cow trail. You can cut that off if you need to. So anyway, he just looked at me and said, what happened? I said, "I really was sick, Sergeant." I said, "My wife, I always drive. I went to the doctor. I got prescriptions and this and that." And he just said, "Okay," walked out. Never heard another word about it. So those techniques work. So to ask your parents is my point. Ask your parents, I'm thinking of this, or what do you think my aptitude is, or what are my strengths? But don't respond. Don't make excuses. Just take note. And if you're going to talk about it, go back the next day.